Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another Q&A video on Forgotten Weapons. I'm Ian MkIII. Couple things a little bit different about this month's Q&A. First off, I am traveling on the road, so I requested questions, as always, from the Forgotten Weapons patrons, and I had to cull out a number of really good questions that were very detail specific because I don't have access to my reference library, so I don't really have good opportunity to do some research on some of these questions. So we're focusing a little bit more this month on opinion related ones rather than very detailed historical fact related ones. I am also excited to announce a new sponsor for Forgotten Weapons, and that is Kiro. They are a Finnish rye whiskey distillery. They actually also make gin. But I had the chance to first visit them back in 2021, did a video tour of their distillery back at that point, and I have very much enjoyed their products ever since, and I'm very happy to announce that they have a discount code for you guys watching the video. If you go to their web store and use the discount code ForgottenWeapons10, you will get a 10% discount off of any of their spirits products. Disclosure, I also get a 10% commission on those sales. So if you don't want to support Forgotten Weapons by being part of the Patreon account, well, you can support it by enjoying some of, as they call it, the world's most relaxed whiskey. This is a 100% rye whiskey, and it's a little bit smoother than American ryes, which are typically quite spicy. This is, to my taste, a little bit softer, a little bit more like bourbon. It's definitely not bourbon, but made with 100% rye whiskey. And this particular one that we have this month is Sauna Stories #2. They took their standard rye whiskey mash bill and then gave it a finish in apricot brandy casks in a sauna, which is really interesting. The temperature in the sauna, not quite proper Finnish sauna temperature, more like, well, 50 to 55 degrees Celsius, which is going to be somewhere on the order of 130, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. I should probably have calculated that exactly before I started talking about it, but it speeds up the interaction between the wood and the spirits by having a high temperature. Anyway, I think this is a truly fantastic expression, a little bit softer, very complex, long finish, a little bit of sweetness from the apricot brandy. Really, really nice. So this is currently available in their European web stores. It's a limited release. It's not, unfortunately, available in the United States right now. But their standard rye whiskey, that is the same mash bill that they make this from, is available in the US and is also quite a lot less expensive. So I'll have links to their web store in the description text below. And again, if you want to try out some fantastic Finnish rye whiskey, Forgotten Weapons 10 will give you a 10% discount on it. All right, now, while I enjoy that, let's get some questions. Our first one is a very basic question from Andrew, which is, how's Ian doing? And the answer is, Ian's doing quite well. I'm staying busy. I continue pretty much to do the same thing I've done for the last couple of years. Travel fairly extensively, both in the US and outside, visiting museums and collections and private collections as well as government collections, filming really cool stuff for you guys. At the same time, also doing a bunch of work with Headstamp Publishing. We have a number of books in the pipeline. I have a World War II firearms series that the next one we do, which will be next year, is going to be World War II Britain. I'm looking forward to that one. The photography is done. I just have to write it. More imminently, I have a book on Finnish small arms. Absolutely coincidental that I may have been in Finland on this trip. A book on Finnish small arms will be launching on Kickstarter next month. So that's coming up quite soon. That's been a book project that's been in the works for a couple of years now, and I'm very excited to have it just about finished and ready to present to you guys and then send off to the printer. It's going to be really cool. So that's my life. Filming, writing, editing, publishing, filming, writing. I can't complain. I could complain, but you guys would give me no sympathy, and rightfully so. Next question is from Roger. What was your firearms background before you started Forgotten Weapons? Did you or any family work in any aspect of the firearms industry before you started doing this? No, actually, well, my father was a collector. My father collected Arisakas in particular, and he actually wrote a small book on them, which is still available on Amazon. It's been in print for like 30 years, 20 years, 25 years now. It's a really good, very basic introductory guide to Arisakas. And if you want Arisakas, if you're interested in collecting them, it's I think, actually still a really good resource to have, and it's cheap. It's like 20 bucks. I'll include a link to that in the description below as well. But that was the only real connection to firearms in my family. I don't have any direct relatives who were in the military. Both of my grandfathers had other jobs during World War II in particular. No one in my family was quite the right age to go to Vietnam. So no, I'm pretty much second generation really into guns, considering my dad's interest in Arisakas. TJ asks, what is my favorite Finnish firearm and why? That is a good question. I think I really like the M28-30, probably. Maybe the M28, maybe the M28-30. They are Civil Guard Mosins. So they're this blend of what do we have available and what's the best that we can do to improve it with very limited funds. So the Finns in the 20s and 30s were a pretty darn poor nation. They didn't have a lot of resources to work with, but what they put together were some really quite good firearms, despite being based on some really pretty limited raw materials. So I shall be doing a video on this rifle soon because I really like it, but I have an M28, Finnish M28 rifle that I can trace the elements of back all the way to, well, through like 4 different countries. And that's a really cool element of the Finnish Mosins, is they're working with Mosin Nagants that were made for the Russians, usually then left in Finland, or sometimes the really interesting ones, made in Russia and then captured by someone else, let's say hypothetically Austro-Hungarian Empire, rechambered for 8x50 Mannlicher. I have a video on that, one of those conversions coming, and then given to Italy as war reparations payments after the end of World War I, and then the Italians, who didn't really have any need for Mosin Nagants, well, the Finns did, and so the Finns bought tens of thousands of Mosins and Mosin parts from the Italians, rebuilt them into things like M27s and 28s and 28-30s and M39s, and then reused them in the Winter War and the Continuation War, and then they get refurbished, they go into storage in Finland, then they get imported into the US. There's a really cool chain of provenance that you can sometimes actually track pretty effectively. So that, to me, rifles like that have a traceable provenance through a lot of different places and modifications and use in multiple theaters, I like those. So to me, the M28 is a pretty cool one. The 28-30 is the basically same basic rifle, but more accurate with better, tweaked a little bit more. We've got a little bit more money to work with, and we're going to make this a better shooting competition, sharpshooting sort of rifle. So both of those two are pretty cool. Next up, Conrad says, are you still learning French, and how is it going? With your numerous visits to Finland, this keeps coming up in this month's Q&A, have you picked up any Finnish? So, oui, j'ai encore essayé de parler français. I'm slowly trying to learn French. It's a difficult language, but I think it is improving. Every time I have the chance, every half a year or so when I have the chance to interact with some French folks, it feels to me like I'm able to speak and understand a bit more than the previous time. So that's a good sign. I had a cab driver on this trip ask me if I was Canadian, which is either a subtle insult or my French is getting better, that they assumed a North American accent, but not horrifically tragic French, means maybe Canadian instead of American. Anyway, yes, I'm still working on it. It's challenging, but it's a good kind of challenge. Works the brain well. As for Finnish, no. I know where to draw the line. I am going to try to learn one language at a time. Finnish is not going to be it. What I am doing is trying to improve my pronunciation of Finnish, because it looks very intimidating, but the pronunciation rules for Finnish are actually pretty simple, pretty basic, pretty uniform, much more so than French. And so I think with a little bit of work, I can look at even a very long, frightening Finnish word and recognize how to actually pronounce it correctly. I may not know what the heck it means, but that's one step up. Victor says, Ian, it's mid-October, late October now, and I would like to ask if you already have plans for 2026. Got any thoughts about the development of the channel and or Headstamp publishing? Can you reveal a little bit about the direction in which you are headed? Sure. So I usually I'm scheduling stuff usually 6 months in advance. So I do have a bunch of things for 2026 already either firmly or tentatively penciled into the calendar. We have, of course, the Moons Out match that'll be in March. We're going to have Finnish Brutality in August of 26. In conjunction with that trip to Finnish Brutality, I did a little bit of groundwork just recently to hopefully stop by the Danish Army Museum, the Tøjhusmuseet, to do some filming there. They have some really cool Danish stuff, some Madsen guns, hopefully Bang, the early Bang semi-auto prototype experimental rifles that never really quite got adopted anywhere but are really complicated and really interesting. So Danish war museums hopefully on the list. What else is in there? SHOT Show, of course. I've got some filming trips in the US planned as well. So yeah, normally about 6 months ahead of time things get pretty well filled up. So I have a little bit of space available in the second half of next year still. And within a couple months, I suspect that will probably be filled up. As for Headstamp publishing, of course, we have the Finnish book, my Finnish book, coming out late this year. Next year, we are planning to have World War II Britain available and launch that. And then we have 2 books by other authors that we are anticipating having ready next year. But I'm reticent to spill the beans on those because you never know when plans change and I don't want to get people's hopes up. I'd rather launch it once we know it's actually going to happen. But let's say one of those is going to be on military submachine guns and one of them is going to be on a cool aspect of US commercial retail firearms. So I'll leave it at that. But those will both be coming next year as well. Imperator says, is your wife at all involved in Forgotten Weapons or Headstamp publishing? Does she travel with you to matches and shoots? I know my wife would not like me being gone so often without her. So my wife is not really involved in either of the businesses. She helps me run the books. She helps make it possible for me to work full time at what I'm doing, which is a huge help. Really couldn't do it without her. But she is a somewhat more independent person, and when I'm around for too long, she starts getting itchy, and she's like, how long are you going to be around here? And so then I leave for a couple weeks on a trip, and then she misses me a lot when I get home, and it's actually a really nice balance. So she doesn't typically travel with me because I spend all of my visits, all of my trips in basically the dungy basements of gun museums, and I would have it no other way. I don't really do much tourism sort of stuff while I'm traveling because, like, I'm on the road. This is when I can work. There's a lot of travel time involved, and there's a lot of opportunity available to film cool stuff that I can only see in whatever particular place I'm in at the time. And I maximize my amount of work and filming, and she doesn't really want to just hang around behind the camera and watch me play with guns for 10 hours a day. So instead, I spend some time away, and then she's really happy to see me when I get home. Will says, now that you are more than just an online documentarian, as a published author, has your access to collections changed? It seems like it with the French gendarmes inviting you in, or was that just an outgrowth of other curators vouching for you? In my experience, as far as I can tell, Headstamp Publishing as a company and my work writing books hasn't actually done that much to change my access to firearms collections. Most of that access really does come about from the video work and from building relationships with collectors and enthusiasts and people who are involved in the military or in the firearms industry or in firearms collecting. It is actually a little surprising to me how often I will go meet someone that I'm filming with and have them not even know that Headstamp Publishing is a thing or that we've done books. So yeah, my access to collections has continued to grow, but it's just an offshoot of continuing to work and getting a wider and wider audience as I do more and more stuff. And those networked connections just sort of grow on each other. My access to the gendarmes in France was through a friend of a friend, basically. Most of the stuff is personal connections. You know, I know a guy, and a guy knows someone who works at an institution who usually is also a fan of Forgotten Weapons, and that turns into being able to get access to a collection. All right, now we are going to shift over from questions about me to questions about guns, starting with Chris, who says, guns attached to a person's hand or arm, like the Sedgley 38 pistols, the glove gun, always seem like such a cool concept, yet they always appear to be a failure historically. Yes, they're always a failure historically, except for some of the weird OSS stuff where it was probably successful for the 3 times they actually used it. What would need to happen for them to be useful outside of being assassin guns? Exosuits or heads-up displays for aiming like a video game or something else? I can see exoskeleton type sci-fi armored suits definitely being a place for permanently mounted or fixed position guns, like on arms or shoulders or that sort of thing. I don't know if that sort of sci-fi concept is a practical reality. Time will tell, and probably not that far off in the future. But sometimes sci-fi concepts can look really cool in movies or on paper and then turn out to have some problems that we just didn't really ever think about. You know, everyone thought we would have flying cars. We certainly have the technology for small flying cars today, and yet there have been other practical things that got in the way and make it so that we don't use them. Video phones are another thing. We sort of have them with things like FaceTime, but we don't really have video phones, I think, the way sci-fi 50 years ago envisioned them. Or, you know, two-way television, which we sort of have, but the practical use of it is less ubiquitous than sci-fi would have thought. So I think the thing that gets in the way of having mounted guns is that you, even in a military sense, you carry a gun a lot more than you're actually shooting it. And if the thing's strapped to you somehow, or like if it's a glove gun that's actually going to inhibit your ability to manipulate the physical environment on a normal basis, it's really inconvenient. You want a way to be able to put the thing down or stash it over your back where it's out of the way but still readily accessible. And these sort of systems that are mounted on an arm or a hand don't allow for that. So I think that's the big thing with them. If you have some sort of exoskeleton where you're not actually physically carrying the weight out on your hand or arm, and perhaps you have a way to interact with the environment separately from the appendage that has the gun mounted on it, that's a place where it could actually be practical and useful. Stephen says, why was there never an attempt to have a NATO standard assault rifle like they attempted to do in the 50s with a battle rifle? So yeah, there was a serious attempt to have the FAL become the standard NATO rifle, although sort of. The real place where it was being trialed for multi-country adoption was ABCs, basically. You had the British Empire, the British Commonwealth, the United States, and the Belgians. So that would have been a really serious block of NATO, in theory, all adopting the same firearm, and it certainly could have led to other countries also adopting it. But there wasn't really a plan for a single standard NATO rifle, or if there was one, it never got very far. And the assault rifle thing is kind of similar in the 1970s. And I think the biggest reason is you have a lot of national manufacturing elements at play in this. The idea of one country making the guns for everybody means everyone's dependent on that one country. There still today, and there certainly were in the 70s and back in the 50s, there's a lot of incentive to have your own domestic rifle production. You want to have that money stay in your own country. You want to have control over the means of production of something that is as important to national defense as the individual soldier's issue rifle. So a great example of this is the FAL in Germany. where the reason that Germany did not adopt the FAL, because the Bundesgrenzschutz, the German border guards, did adopt the FAL, and then the army, the Bundeswehr, did initially purchase FALs, but they were unable to come up with a good licensing agreement to manufacture them in Germany. And that's fundamentally what led to them going to the G3 rifle instead. There was, FAL production as it was envisioned in the 50s, when it's the US and the British and the Canadians and the Belgians working on this, each one of those countries would have manufactured its own FAL rifles. So the US had licensing agreements in place, essentially, to make FALs in the US. The British were making them, and did make them, at Enfield. The Belgians obviously developed the rifle and made it at FN. The Canadians, if they wanted to, could have manufactured it in Canada. Did they? Honestly, now I should know that. I can't think off the top of my head if the Canadians were making FALs in Canada or if they just got them from Enfield. At any rate, everyone had the ability, if they wanted to make the FAL in their own home country. Now, let's go to the 70s, when 5.56 becomes a thing, and what NATO was specifically interested in standardizing was the cartridge. And there was a NATO trial that tested 4 different cartridges. So it was a US 5.56, which was XM2777. This was a round that was had a new projectile for enhanced armor penetrating capability. You then had a Belgian 5.56. That was the SS-109 round, today's 62 grain semi-armor piercing 5.56 round. And then you had the British 4.85, and you had the German 4.7 millimeter caseless. And contrary to what a lot of people think, that the US foisted 5.56 on the NATO alliance, in reality, NATO adopted the Belgian round, which meant that the US actually had to do a lot of retrofitting to American M16 rifles, because our 1 in 12 rifling twist didn't adequately stabilize the new SS-109 cartridge, which leads to the US adopting a faster twist rifling. So where I'm going with this is, everyone kind of knew in the 70s that it would not be feasible to get everyone on board with the same rifle. And what was much more important logistically is having the same cartridge. Then next most important would be having the same magazine. And so there is a draft NATO standardization on the 5.56 magazine, essentially the AR-15 magazine. Interestingly, it was never actually ratified by NATO, so it never officially came into force, but it's a standardization document that gets used anyway. And so what you'll see in the 1970s is, after SS-109 is adopted as the new standard NATO cartridge, basically all of the new NATO rifles use interchangeable magazines. You've got the FNC, you've got the Beretta AR-7090, the FAMAS G2 that comes along a little bit later. France isn't directly involved in this caliber standardization, but the FAMAS G2 uses this same magazine. The British L85 uses it. The M16, of course, uses it. The G36 does not, but fast forward a bit today, the HK416 does. It's effectively a NATO standard magazine. And if you're all using the same ammo and the same magazine, that's way more important than all having the same rifle, because you're much more likely to, it will be much more useful to be able to ship magazines and ammunition to allies than to ship full rifles or rifle repair components. All of these countries have pretty significant stockpiles of rifles and industry in place to do the manufacturing and the repair. And so in urgent time of need, either you're going to just ship new rifles entirely. If Belgium gets overrun again, it's not like, and they had the FNC, it's not like it's that important for the US or the British to ship them replacement FNC parts. They're going to need whole new guns, and they can figure out how to work with a new rifle pretty easily. And if it all has the same ammo and the same magazines, that's 90% of the job right there. Let's see, next up, Adam says, why is there so much diversity of opinion on rifle grenades and grenade launchers? Most classes of small arms have evolved to agree on standards, but it seems like we haven't figured this one out yet. I'm not entirely sure about that conclusion. So there are basically two standardized sort of grenades. One of them is the spigot-launched rifle grenade that slides over the muzzle of a rifle, and that is pretty well standardized. NATO has basically a grenade spigot dimensional standard, and rifle grenades can interchange across a lot of those NATO grenade launching attachments pretty easily. Now, there is some difference in how they're launched. Some of them use blank projectiles that don't have, or blank rounds without projectiles. Some of them will actually, you fire a live bullet right into the grenade, and it's designed to catch that bullet and use that as part of its propellant energy. So that's not totally standardized, but sort of the concept of spigot-mounted dual-purpose grenade. You've got one for anti-personnel, one explosive grenade, and you've got one armor-piercing for anti-armor use. Everyone's got their own individual grenades, but the concepts are pretty similar, and they generally would interchange across different rifle platforms if they needed to. Then you also have the 40mm grenade class, which is, the idea is to get 40mm grenades are a little more general purpose. They're easier to use. They have less felt recoil to them than the gigantic, flying carrots of death, as the Swiss guys over at Bloke on the Range would say. And the 40mm grenades kind of come around when people realize that anti-armor grenades are kind of limited in their practical utility. Being able to get close enough and shoot well enough to actually disable a tank with an anti-tank rifle grenade is a little bit of a sketchy proposition. And as anti-tank guided missiles, shoulder-fired ATGMs improve, they can do that job a lot better than the rifle grenades. And so instead, rifle grenades can focus on anti-infantry high explosive applications. And the 40mm is pretty good at that. The grenades are a lot smaller, they're fully self-contained, you can launch them from an underbarrel thing that's easier to aim and more effective. And the 40mm grenades, again, are quite well standardized. There are a couple different types of them. You've basically got a low pressure and a medium/high pressure. But those are also pretty well standardized these days. There is now, and we'll get into this in actually the very next question, but there's also some work on slightly smaller, sort of more smart munition grenades. But we'll see where that actually goes. So, and in fact, rolling directly into that, Clean Sweep says, considering the adoption of the MTL-30 grenade launcher, would it have been worthwhile for the US Army to fully adopt the XM25 before H&K dropped out of the program? My answer is no, followed by an immediate rejection of the question, because the US Army has not adopted the MTL-30. The US Army gave FN a development contract for a couple $1 million to keep working on it, but it's not adopted. It's not in mass production. It's not going to troops. That thing looks like it's got some potential, so here's some money, keep developing it, and if you can make it good enough to meet all of our specifications, then maybe we'll adopt it. So this and the XM25 are both essentially trying to get the best of, well, they're trying to take a 40mm grenade and make it frankly more like a rifle. So one of the big problems with 40mm grenades is they have a very low muzzle velocity. You're talking like maybe 250 feet per second. And so they have these very looping trajectories. It's like a tennis ball launcher full of explosives. With things like the 25 and 30mm grenades, what they're trying to do is get that muzzle velocity up so that it's much more like a rifle trajectory. This was the case with the South African Neosted. I did a video on this a bunch of years ago. And the whole concept there was to have a smaller grenade, but one that was going more like 1,000 feet per second. Like 1,000 feet per second, 20mm grenade, smaller explosive radius, but you didn't have to kind of predict where your target was going to be by the time the grenade got there. You could shoot it like a point and shoot rifle, which I thought had a lot of potential at the time. And that continues to be developed today. The OICW had an element of that in it. The XM25 had an element of that. And what they're doing typically is combining this more linear, flatter trajectory, high velocity grenade, a little bit smaller so that it can be more easily shoulder fired. When you up the velocity like that, you really increase the felt recoil. And there's a limit, a practical limit to how much recoil you can put into a weapon system like this before it becomes impractical to shoot or has to be mounted to a vehicle. Like, you're not shooting a full auto AGS 40mm automatic grenade launcher off the shoulder. It's going to have way too much recoil and it's not going to be feasible. That's why those things are vehicular or tripod mounted. What they're trying to do to make up for the reduced size and weight and velocity of the grenades is add programmable smart features to them. Allow them to detonate at a pre-programmed distance. So you can use a laser built into the optic system on the weapon and say, okay, my target is at 187 yards, program the grenade to detonate at 187 yards, and then I fire it in the air above the target and it explodes and blows shrapnel down into the enemy fighting position and is more effective than just trying to, you know, golf ball a grenade right into a foxhole. The more of the computer componentry you add to the grenade, of course, the less mass and volume you have available for actual payload, explosive payload of the grenade. That limits their capability. And then you have an interface issue. This is something that I've seen a lot on thermal optics, where you've got a lot of features available in a thermal optic, you've got a lot of features available in programmable grenade systems. How do you make them intuitive and quickly and easily usable? Because if you have to scroll through 5 different menus to program the grenade to do whatever it is you're trying to do, by the time you get it done, the enemy's left the position. Like, this stuff has to be really intuitive and easy to use. Like, you need the combination of the Apple iPhone interface with the HK XM25 grenade launcher, where you don't really think about it, you just kind of do the instinctive thing to set the grenade and it works. Now, I have not ever used one of these new MTL-30s. I haven't used the XM25 either. So I don't know the details of how the interfaces are set up at this point, but that's going to be one of their biggest hurdles to come over, is make the grenades effective, but then also make them practical to use in a stressful combat environment. I guess to answer the specific direct question, should we have adopted the XM25 back when we had the option to? The answer is absolutely not. I think this technology has evolved a lot from the XM25 to today, and I think it will go quite a lot farther, probably in a relatively short time. And we're better off holding off and waiting for a really good, more mature version of this sort of technology and adopting that. What we don't want to do is, frankly, be in the position of the French with the Lebel, where we adopt the first thing that comes along as quickly as possible in order to win the arms race for this sort of smart grenade launcher or smokeless powder rifle, only to discover that 5 years later, people have refined the technology a tremendous amount, and now what we adopted is already obsolete. Moose Maimer says, between the Dardick and the Gyrojet, which is the least useless? Do either of them have any redeeming qualities? To me, I'd say the Dardick is the less unuseful. The Dardick's the better of the two guns. If I had to choose one of the two to actually shoot and use, it would be the Dardick. So the problem with the Dardick was it made some weird tweaks to modern cartridges. In essence, like, there are some theoretical reasons to do it, and all of them were bad, and the guns didn't work all that well. But, well, I'm sorry, the guns worked okay. They didn't take off commercially because they had totally unique ammunition, and you really had this chicken and egg problem of people don't want to buy the gun unless there's ammo available, but people don't want to pay to make the ammo unless the guns are available and there's a demand for the ammo. And how do you get both at the same time? And there was not really any compelling use case for the Dardick that other guns couldn't do just as well. But technically, the Dardick mostly worked. The Gyrojet, on the other hand, is a fundamentally different type of cartridge. Instead of just making, like, the cartridge case as sort of a polymer, triangular polymer shape, well, they're going to, instead of gunpowder, we're getting rid of the gunpowder entirely, and we're making little rockets. Those things had some significant technical issues and no compelling use case that couldn't be well accomplished by something else, especially today. And so, yeah, I would take a Dardick all day over a Gyrojet. All right, our next question comes from B. Davis, who says, what is 30 carbine classified as, pistol or intermediate cartridge? It seems like an oddball. I can't think of any comparable cartridges to it, With the rise of PCCs, do you think it'll make a comeback in something other than the M1 carbine or Ruger revolvers? 30 carbine is definitely an intermediate cartridge. Despite its use in a handful of pistols, like some of the Ruger Blackhawks, I believe, AMT made a 30 caliber automag. There are one or two others out there. Despite its use in a couple of pistols, it is definitely an intermediate cartridge. It is on the low end of the power scale for intermediate cartridges, but that doesn't prevent it from being one. The M2 carbine fits the concept of assault rifle really very well, and frankly, I think it's a pretty good cartridge. That said, I don't see it making a comeback because it's not really in mass production anywhere. It made sense when it was a military issue firearm as well with the M1 carbine. You know, ammunition's being produced. A lot of our military ammunition producers are also civilian ammunition producers. And if they're making the ammo, it becomes a lot easier for companies to make firearms to use that ammo. See the previous Dardick and Gyrojet question. And that's why you had things like Ruger revolvers and AMT automags in 30 carbine, because the cartridge was available. So why not? What do we have to risk by making a gun for it? When it's no longer really in common usage, a lot of that goes away. In addition, there are no real particularly good magazines for 30 carbine. Really, there's only one magazine for 30 carbine. It's the M1 carbine magazine that's in any sort of common use. And so if someone wanted to make a scale, like a bigger PCC, semi-auto carbine in 30 carbine, well, M1 carbine magazines are generally well known to not be super reliable. They were fine for World War II, but they're delicate. They're kind of disposable. They're not really great magazines. And that alone is going to make them problematic for current day, like modern expectations and use. Contrast that to, we have AR-15 magazines, and if you can make something that'll feed from a standard PMag, then magazines are not an issue. Everyone's got 1,000 of them already, and it checks off this huge potential obstacle in firearms development. So if you want something that'll do what 30 carbine does, honestly, I think 300 Blackout pretty well covers it. Supersonic 300 Blackout does most of what 30 carbine does. It's a little bit physically larger of a cartridge because it is a necked cartridge. Not a lot, but it's larger than 30 carbine. But the ammo's available, the magazines are available, the platform that fits it is already available. You know, the case head fits an existing standard bolt pattern. There were a couple of other 30 carbine guns that were developed back a couple decades ago, many decades ago now. Beretta actually sort of made a submachine gun, the Beretta Model 57 in 30 carbine. It was levered delayed. You also had the San Cristobal carbine in 30 carbine. The French experimented with some 30 carbine stuff right after World War II and then dropped it. It's not coming back. 5.56 is too similar in form and power while being better in basically every way than 30 carbine. And if you do want something that's actually 30 caliber, you've got 300 Blackout to do it. Let's see. Old Man Winter says, the glorious leader of Elbonia has seen the U.S. adoption of the M7, the new SIG rifle, and have asked you to weigh in on the subject. Should they follow suit and go to a battle rifle? And if so, what great idea do you have? So if I'm the traditional defense minister of Elbonia, and just to recap for you guys, if you're not familiar with the Elbonia meme, the idea is you are the defense minister of the fictional nation of Elbonia. You are tasked with choosing their small arms equipment, but you are actually a traitor. And so what you have to come up with is equipment that sounds really good, that you can convince someone of being a good idea when it is actually a really bad idea. And to my mind, the M7 is a stereotypically perfect Elbonian rifle. It has in fact been argued as being a good thing, well enough to get remarkably, like frighteningly far through the US adoption process at this point, when it is in fact, I think at least, a very bad idea. I do not think a full power battle rifle is the best option for a military force these days, and even if it did, I don't think the M7 is a good idea. I think its overpressure rounds are a bad idea. They're going to lead to very premature weapon wear. They're still having problems manufacturing the ammo. They're having problems manufacturing the rifles. 75 or 80,000 psi of chamber pressure is nuts and brings with it a whole bunch of problems that we don't have on normal cartridges. It also leads to this thing of, there's so much complexity to making this special ammo that what guys are actually training with is often a normal reduced pressure cartridge. And it seems pretty clear to me that that's going to kind of end up being the general purpose ammunition. And if you have this war supply of, in case of war, break glass and pull out your one magazine of special high pressure dual material ammo, that's like, everyone's been working with one kind of ammo and practicing with it and training with it. We don't have the experience on the special high-end ammo. And then all of a sudden, when it really counts, we pull out the unique stuff, and then that's guaranteed to lead to problems. Ammunition carrying capacity on the soldier is close to halved compared to 5.56. That's a huge problem. If I wanted to sabotage the nation of Elbonia, giving them a low capacity, overpowered, fragile rifle that can't be effectively manufactured yet, and convincing them that it's a great idea because you'll be able to engage targets out to 800 meters with this special AI-powered scope, and you'll be able to defeat any body armor yet designed, ignoring the fact that Elbonia's enemies don't actually have said body armor, that I'd be hard-pressed to come up with a concept better than the XM7. Maybe you throw a bipod on it and they are select fire. Maybe throw a bipod on it and convince the Elbonians to use it as their light machine gun as well as their infantry rifle. That could be a little bit worse than what we're doing with the M7. But every day that I wake up and see that the M7 is still in the development pipeline, I wonder how long that will last before people realize that this is a bad idea and go back to regular 5.56. That is really delicious. Timmy says, in light of last month's discussion of intermediate versus full caliber rifles, which do you think is more effective in a squad level support weapon? Belt fed versus magazine. We seem to be seeing this question play out in the Marines with the M27 IAR versus the M250. M250 being the light machine gun iteration of the 6.8x51, the companion to the M7 rifle. I think there's a legitimate place for both a belt-fed and a magazine-fed support weapon. Maybe, I think we've got enough experience and good enough material science now that you can probably just go with a belt-fed. Now, whether it's 5.56 or 7.62 or 6.8x51 really is going to depend on the unit tactics. I think as long as you design your unit around, or design your doctrine around the weapons that the guys have, it'll be just fine. The problem you get is not going to be, well, if you adopt a mag-fed 308 support weapon, you'll definitely have problems. No, I think it's more like if you have an infantry doctrine built around a belt-fed 5.56 that's got a ton of ammo to it and is really easy to shoot really well and maybe has a slightly limited range, but then you equip the guys with a mag-fed 308, then you'll have problems. As long as your doctrine matches the weapons, I think all of these options are okay. If I had to go with one, personally, I kind of like the way the US is doing it. I think the idea of having a light support weapon in 5.56 to go along with an infantry 5.56 rifle, and then having the 30 caliber heavier belt-fed machine guns at a company level, typically on tripods or on vehicle mounts, I think that makes sense. I think having the volume of ammunition carried with a unit is a little bit better than having a really powerful round. That said, of course, I have zero combat experience myself, and I'm sure there are guys who will both support this concept and guys who will very vociferously take the opposite side of the argument. And again, I don't think either one of these is an automatically bad plan as long as you have your doctrine designed to match your equipment. Kind of continuing to make the same point here, Joao says Portugal took years to replace their decades-old G3s as an Army service rifle with FN SCARs in 7.62, I believe. Do you think this was a wise choice? What would my choice be, or the next best thing? I don't think, like I just said, I don't think a full power battle rifle is a good idea. as a standard infantry rifle. I think having more ammo and a lighter cartridge is better overall. It's a better compromise of factors. If I were Portugal, I probably would have replaced the G3s with something else. Maybe a 5.56 SCAR. They had a few issues, but not a ton. The Bren 2 and Bren 3 seem to be one of the better modern combat rifles out there. They're doing, as far as I can tell, they're quite well liked in Ukraine. And then, of course, you've got a number of ARs that are also good platforms. Knights has one that the British are adopting. I'm really interested to see where Sako goes with their ARs. So they've been adopted by the Swedes. There was a bit of initial hiccup, growing pains with fire tolerances in the fire control group. I'm not really worried about it. I'm quite confident that Sako will figure that out and fix it. It's not going to be a big problem. It's the growing pains of starting a large-scale production of a new product. Something is always going to go wrong. Sako is a long-standing, very skilled company. They'll have no problem fixing that issue. And once they do, Sweden and Finland both are going to be running Sako ARs. To me, having handled one of those, it's the ARG40, or the ARG, there are a couple different models of it. It seems to me to be really well done. It's got the right balance of heavy parts with light parts. Like, you want things like a barrel to be somewhat heavy so that they have a little bit more durability in combat, a little more heat tolerance, but you don't want them to be stupidly heavy. You want good, reasonable ambidextrous controls that are well thought out without a whole lot of weird bells and whistles that will end up getting in the way. I think Sako has done a really good job balancing all of those elements out, and I'm excited to see how that rifle does as it gets into conscript and mainline army use in Sweden and Finland, and we may see that become a serious competitor to the HK416 throughout Western Europe. Let's see, Alex says, if 5.56 or 2.23 was never invented, and thus America never adopted the M16 and its lineage of rifles, what would the US be using? Would they have stuck it out with the M14 through Vietnam, or gone with the FAL or AR-10? Would infantry at the squad level look more like it did in World War II, with battle rifles alongside shotguns and submachine guns? No, I think if the US hadn't gone with the M16 and the 5.56 round, I think we would have adopted something along those same lines. I think it became fairly evident to anyone who was really paying attention when the Soviets adopted 7.62x39 and that whole family of firearms that the intermediate cartridge really was a better solution. It may have taken some time to overcome more traditional, more conservative elements in a lot of militaries after World War II to have that actually see widespread NATO adoption, but it would have happened sooner or later. And you can see that from the 1970s NATO cartridge trials that we talked about earlier. It wasn't just the US saying everyone else has to use our cartridge. The British had small bore stuff, the Germans were working on small bore stuff, the Belgians were doing it on 5.56, but it would have been out there. I think the system we have today with an intermediate caliber assault rifle as the standard infantry arm without submachine guns or battle rifles is like, that's the best system, and we would have gotten there one way or another. James says, I just purchased a copy of The World's Assault Rifles and have enjoyed it. Excellent. What other books would you recommend to build, or at least start to build, a good firearms reference library? This is an almost impossible question to ask because there isn't really that much of a thing of a generic like a one-size-fits-all firearms reference library. The question is, what firearms are you interested in? Then look at the books that are available on those firearms. You know, if you're into Lugers or Mausers, there's piles of books that are really good reference material on those specific guns. But if you're not specifically into Lugers or Mausers, you really don't need 10 different books on Lugers or Mausers. Unless you're someone in my position who's trying to accumulate a library that has the most detailed references on everything, well, then you don't even need a book recommendation. You just buy every book that's out there. So to me, The World's Assault Rifles is useful. It's a good recommendation because it covers a huge scope of guns that are very widely used. So there's a really good chance that whatever you're interested in, there'll be some element of it in that book. I would say Handguns of the World is also a really good buy. That's by Edward Ezell, and it was published by Barnes & Noble. It's available, at least last time I looked, it was available quite cheap. It's another tome of a book. It's, again, I don't have it here, but 600 pages or more, I think, covering basically all the development of semi-auto military handguns. And that overlaps a lot with civilian handguns. There's a ton of information in that. Edward Ezell was the curator of the firearms collection in the Smithsonian. He was a huge pillar of the firearms academia, and absolutely 100% recommend his book, Handguns of the World. Once you get beyond that, it's like there's sort of your overall look at military rifles and military handguns. Then it's, what are you interested in? If you're interested in hunting rifles, there's stuff to pursue there. If you're interested in target revolvers, there's stuff there. Are you interested in the classic Americana, the Colts and Winchesters, or the classic German World War II trophy guns, the Lugers and the Mausers, or machine guns or shotguns? Like, there's just too much variety out there to make any sort of recommendation for the generic firearms library that everyone who likes to shoot guns ought to have. And I have a follow-up, well, a second question here that's very similar from Old Man Winter, who says, besides Ammo Encyclopedia and Cartridges of the World, do you know any books one could get for cartridge research? Same exact thing applies here. You just listed, well, Cartridges of the World would have been my one standardized. If you're interested in ammo, this is going to cover a lot of everything. But then, what sort of ammunition are you interested in? Most ammo books are really quite specific. You'll get books on either, there'll be like hand loading guides that are very old and don't really give you any information that isn't better presented in a modern version of Cartridges of the World or a modern current edition hand loader's guide. But then you'll get books, you'll get multi-volume series of books on the 7.92 Mauser cartridge, or there are some books out there specifically on the 9mm Parabellum cartridge or cartridges of the Old West. And again, you need a specific concept of what you're trying to study before you can make any good book recommendations. Jeffrey Bangle says, every gun tuber I watch uses the term spring tension when referring to springs that are quite obviously in compression, not tension. The former physics student in me cringes whenever I hear it. Do you know where this contradictory terminology comes from? I suspect I do. I'm certainly guilty of doing this myself, and I think it comes from the fact that most of the people in question are not former physics students and are using a generic term to refer to a spring that is not at rest. And frankly, if we were to take a self-reflective, objective look, it's probably about the same as magazine versus clip, where it really bugs the heck out of gun people, but it doesn't actually make any difference. When some non-gun person uses the word clip when they should have used magazine, we all look at them and we go, aha, this person doesn't actually know what they're talking about. But they convey the information perfectly well. Like when they say clip, you know what they were talking about. When someone says that spring's in tension, when it's not, when it's in compression, they still got the point across, especially to people who aren't physics students. And it just comes from lack of specialized, focused education. And since you mention it, I'm going to try to be more precise in my terminology in that particular area going forward. No guarantees, because it'll probably slip out again. But it's a more specialized term that is technically correct, but doesn't actually convey information differently to those of us who aren't specifically talking about physics. Let's see. George says, in reference to my question last month about pseudo full auto in battle rifles being a terrible idea, do you think that pseudo full auto will be a boost to PCC development and sales? Do you think that we will see a pseudo full auto Thompson or Sten on the market anytime soon? Or pseudo full auto trigger packs for the semi-auto M240 and M249? I have already seen reference to people talking about FRTs for the Mini-Me, for the M249. I haven't seen one myself, but it sounds like they're out there. If we actually get like a Supreme Court ruling that FRTs are legal and are not machine guns, yes, I think they will drive a lot of sales of whatever sort of PCCs are compatible with them, which right now seems to be mostly AR stuff, because full auto 9mm is super fun, and pseudo full auto 9mm is also, I would expect, super fun. Like, it's great recreational shooting. And 9mm is not that expensive. This kind of fills a hole of, there used to be guys with relatively inexpensive belt-fed machine guns, for machine guns, who could go buy ammo for a couple pennies a round, and so they'd get a pallet of ammo and go out to the range at some place like Knob Creek and shoot belt-feds at cyclic all day long and have a great time, and they could afford to do it. And full auto 9mm, pseudo full auto, faux full auto 9mm, offers some of the same sort of entertaining options. 5.56 as well, but 5.56 is a little more expensive than 9mm. The problem right now is everyone seems really gung-ho about FRTs when, personally, as far as I can see it, the legal standing of an FRT is really pretty fragile right now. It's all based on one settlement agreement with one company, and I'm skeptical about it. Not saying we shouldn't have it. I'm all for it being legal, but it isn't really yet. And it makes me nervous when I see people doing things that could get them in a lot of trouble if an FRT is deemed illegal, because an FRT still very well could be deemed full auto. So what you do out in private that nobody finds out about is cool. That's one thing. But you're not going to find me putting an FRT. I'm not going to be the nail that sticks up here by putting one in video footage myself until there is some more stable determination of their legality. But when that happens, oh yeah, buy some stock in 9mm ammo producers and AR9 manufacturers, and especially the delayed blowback stuff that is much nicer to shoot than simple blowback AR9s. Those guns are going to have a new spike in popularity, although maybe we're seeing it already, because like I alluded to, there's a lot of people who are all in on FRTs already. And so some of that new interest in that purchasing has already happened and is ongoing. So still, if there's a really solid Supreme Court case, I think it'll really kick up a notch beyond that. David asks, will Metal Storm style weapons ever find a niche? It's always interesting to see early repeaters with similar sort of superposed magazines. So Metal Storm was this concept of a multi-barrel pepper box thing with a bunch of projectiles and propellant charges stacked in it, and you'd kind of yank the lanyard on the thing and have a block of 20 by 20 barrels. So there's 400 barrels, and each one of them has 10 rounds stacked in it, and it just blasts them off in 1/10 of a second, and you've got this rain of lead that comes down somewhere. It was, I think people know about it entirely because of TV shows like Future Weapons, because as far as I know, it never went any farther than some demonstration stuff, because it doesn't really offer that much. It looks impressive, it sounds cool on paper, it's great for the Elbonian artillery corps, but in reality, it's kind of a one-use thing, and then you have to go through a fairly elaborate process of reloading it. And what does that get you that one 155mm artillery shell loaded with fragmentation ammo doesn't get you? It's a lot faster to run, it's got a longer range. If you need twice as much firepower, you fire 2 shots instead of having 2 whole contraptions set up. I do not see that Metal Storm as being something that has a future. It's going to have accuracy issues. Firing all those rounds one behind the other is absolutely going to have accuracy problems. It has reloading issues. And the place where we're going to see development instead are things like guided projectiles for artillery shells, which we're already seeing, and totally different weapon systems that can have deliver the same sort of ordnance on target via flying drone that this thing could as a firearm. Philip asks, what delayed or locked system would be interesting to get a pistol in? Something that's more unusual than Browning tilting barrel, rotating barrel, gas-operated, gas-delayed, and blowback. Well, Philip, you're not leaving a whole lot of options there. There are a finite number of firearms locking systems, and a quick run through in my head here says the only ones that you've left are the roller, delayed and locked, lever delayed, and long recoil. And we have a few of each of those in the handgun world. Well, lever's like the weirdest. I think the new Dragon is lever delayed. But there are not many lever delayed pistols. Lever delayed would be cool. Like, I like lever delayed. They're all neat, especially because the FAMAS is one of them, but it's not the only one. And lever delay is a fun system. Beyond that, like, to me, this is the wrong thing to look to choose a pistol based on. You want to choose it because it does the job well, not because it's particularly weird. Usually, if it's particularly weird, and that's its outstanding characteristic, it's probably not a very good handgun, and it's probably not going to be successful. Nathan says, why wasn't the No. 3 Schofield the gun of choice over the single-action Army? I understand the ammo compatibility, so why not make a No. 3 Schofield chambered in .45 Colt? There are a couple of reasons here. The Schofield was not a long enough cylinder to actually chamber .45 Colt, so it would have required a new frame and a new cylinder to do it. The Schofield is a top break revolver where .45 Colt was a pretty potent cartridge for a pistol. It's a 40 grain charge of black powder. The .45 Schofield uses a 28 grain charge of black powder. So you're talking about a third more, well, 50% more almost powder. For the Colt cartridge, Schofield is a top break where the Colt was a solid frame revolver. Top break is going to have durability issues with a particularly potent cartridge. So they're, and on top of that, .45 Colt has a very thin rim. It's designed for the single-action Army revolver, which uses a rod ejector. So you're poking a rod down into the case and popping it out by hitting the inside of the case. The top break Schofield is using a star extractor to lift cartridges out by the rims. If you have a very small rim, that's not much material for a star extractor to work on. .45 Colt in a Schofield would have been overpowered. It would have led to a relatively short lifespan of the firearm. The guns would get kind of loose and wobbly in the frame hinges and locking latches, and it wouldn't have extracted very reliably. So there's actually a lot of reasons that the Schofield isn't ideal for the .45 Colt cartridge. Frankly, what they did instead kind of makes sense. You adopt a .45 Schofield cartridge that can run in Colts and then use it for both guns. Having a Colt cartridge, a cartridge for the single-action Army that's a little bit lighter means it's going to be easier to shoot. The guys running around with single-action Armies, this was not the height of the U.S. Army as the place where the particularly talented and smart in society go for a career. The Army was a little more of a dumping ground for people who couldn't find anything else better in the 1870s. And none of them did that much practicing with shooting. They didn't have much budget for practice ammo. And giving them a less potent cartridge is going to have probably immediate beneficial effects on their shooting abilities. This is similar to the British going from 455 Webley in World War I down to 38 Webley in World War II because they realized that a weaker round that actually hits the target is more useful than a really powerful round that misses completely. Charles says, hey Ian, a few months ago I had the displeasure of my first two-gun match DQ, disqualification. I made the error of attempting to feed shells into the shotgun while running in my support hand direction and broke the 180 within the first minute of the first stage of the day. Needless to say, I was pretty upset with myself. Have you ever been DQ'd from a match, and how did you manage it? I actually have not. We always say in match briefings that everyone gets DQ'd sooner or later, and it doesn't mean we don't like you. It just means you're done shooting for the day, and all of that is true, but cross my fingers, it hasn't happened to me yet. I would be really quite annoyed. DQ would be really obnoxious to me because usually if I'm at a match, I'm filming it. And a DQ means what was going to be a video on the schedule ain't going to be a video on the schedule because I'm not shooting the rest of the match. So I would like to think that I would be very annoyed with myself and handle it and use that as a reason to redouble my attention to safety handling in the future. But until it happens, I guess I really won't know. Nick says, if you had to declare the bar none, hands down, undisputed champion of durability in transferable MGs, what family of guns would you pick and why? Well, until you said transferable, I was trying to figure out if I would go with the M240 or the PK. Those are both extremely durable guns. Frankly, the 240 is probably the more durable of the two. It was funny, I was actually visiting Sweden recently on this trip. You'll see a bunch of videos coming from Aimpoint and some other cool Swedish stuff. And talking to some Swedish Army guys, they still have guns. Like, Sweden was the first country to adopt the 240, the FN Mag. They adopted it in 6.5 by 55 before they switched over to 7.62 NATO, and they still have FN Mags from that very first order from like the 1950s that are chugging right along. The FN Mag, the M240 in US service, is a ridiculously durable gun. But it is essentially not it's not a transferable gun. You're going to find, maybe there's one or two of them. I think there's one or two that are transferable, but that's it. If you want an accessible, transferable, ownable machine gun, and it has to be durable, the answer is, without a doubt, the MkIII. MkIII or Vickers family, the Vickers being an evolution of the MkIII gun. And the reason is those guns were engineered to go hundreds of thousands of rounds. The downside to them, excuse me, the downside to them is it's not a super simple gun. Like, it's not just a matter of throw ammo in the gun and start shooting and it takes care of itself, which is one of the nice elements of more modern stuff. The MkIII family requires an understanding by the operator of how to operate the gun, how to maintain it, how to use it. You need to know how to properly pack the forward and backward glands on the barrel so that the water jacket doesn't leak. You need to know how to set the fusee spring tension, because like all of these things are adjustable on a MkIII gun in a way that they kind of aren't on most more modern guns. Once you understand how to use that gun, it'll run until the end of time or until you run out of ammunition for it. This is why we see MkIII guns in Ukraine. Not quite so much anymore, but early in the war they were on both sides, because they still work. And they will work for you as long as you put in the time to understand how to run them. They are old guns. These are guns that were developed in the 1880s and then became very popular in the 1900s, 1910s. Like, 1910s are the height of the MkIII gun. So that's 110 years ago. Treat this thing like you would treat an old automobile that has like a non-synchronized transmission, and you have to pay attention to the water temperature gauge and the voltage gauge, and it ain't computerized. It doesn't do it for you. But once you know how to use it, it's going to be more durable and more reliable than anything else out there. Let's see, Nick, not sure if it's the same Nick or a different Nick, says, will Russia ever phase out 54 rimmed, 7.62 by 54 rimmed? The PK kind of makes me think it won't happen, at least not in my lifetime. They've stuck with it, I think, because it's always been more expensive to try and change it than to stick with it, and the PKM is a fantastically good gun, and that's their primary use of 54 rimmed. It's fine for precision rifles like the Dragunov, not great, but does the job well enough. Part of me wonders, like, if they hadn't invaded Ukraine, I would say that who knows? There's no visible timeline for when they might replace it, because as long as it keeps working, why change it? However, I wonder if there isn't a possibility that, you know, one of the outcomes of the war in Ukraine is that the Russians are going to have to completely rebuild their military. Whatever the end of this war is, and I think it does really look like the Ukrainians are going to persevere and come out intact at the end of this. But even if they don't, even if Russia by some miracle manages to overrun the rest of Ukraine and win, which I don't think is very likely, their military is wrecked. Like, it has to be completely rebuilt. The stockpiles of material that have been the subsistence of the Russian military machine are all gone. So this might actually be the opportune moment to replace things like obsolete rifle cartridges. If you're going to have to re-equip guys anyway, well, then you start with a blank slate and go to a modern rimless cartridge and finally get rid of 54 rimmed. If this is the war that lets them use up some of the major remaining stockpiles of 54 rimmed ammo, I think we're probably going to see the Maxim guns gone by the end of this war, if they aren't already. I haven't seen much footage of Maxims in the last year. They may all be hors de combat at this point and gone. Like, a lot of your reason to keep it is that you have all these old stockpiles of guns and ammo. And if that's gone, well, there's your chance to rebuild it. Now, what the Russian capability is going to be to adopt new stuff is an entirely separate question. But I think it's a better chance of it happening now than I would have guessed a couple of years ago. John says, does the US need to design a dedicated rifle to deal with drones? Probably not. Dedicated weapons to deal with drones? Absolutely. And it's not just one. It would need to be a suite of different weapons, because there's a whole lot of different things under the heading of drones. There's little suicide FPV drones, there's bomber drones, there's Shahed-style long-range 100-kilogram payload drones, and all of these things require different weapons. Like, you might shoot down an FPV drone with a shotgun. You're not shooting down a long-range Shahed with a shotgun. You're not going to go after an FPV drone with an attack helicopter. So drone defense is going to be a whole new family of weapon systems. I think directed energy ones are going to be a big part, both microwave and laser. Laser has the potential to allow a very low cost per intercept of drones. One of the big problems we have right now is, if you use some guided missiles to take down really cheap drones, that's not an economically viable long-term solution. I think there is some potential for shoulder weapons against the very small, very tactical end drones, but I think it's pretty sketchy. If you've got an FPV drone with essentially a grenade built into it, by the time it's close enough to effectively hit it with a shotgun or a rifle using some sort of multi-projectile ammunition, it's dangerously close to you already. Like, I've seen some videos of guys who did shoot down a drone with a shotgun, and it sure looked like the fragmentation from the explosion would have hit them anyway. So a rifle to me is one of the last things that you want to be stuck trying to use on drones. But you do need some other systems, and what those systems end up being, time will tell. I couldn't have predicted today's drones a year ago, and who knows where those systems will be in another year if the war is still going in another year. Fat Dog says, is there, or has there ever been, any real valuable tactical use for the full auto setting on submachine guns, or is it just a waste of ammo? Could all the submachine guns ever made and deployed have been just as effective as semi-auto PCCs? I don't think so. I think with assault rifles, the full auto mode is a lot more optional. When it comes to submachine guns, the pistol caliber chambering means they're really pretty controllable. Like, holding a submachine gun on target at 25 or 50 meters in full auto is not that big of a problem, and their tactical use is generally suppressive fire or getting more than one hit on a target at close range. And full auto, I think, makes good sense for them. If anything, I think you could argue that semi-auto in submachine guns is not that necessary. If I had to choose between a submachine gun, or PCC, that was either semi-only or full auto only, I can really see a good argument for full auto only in them, which is, again, very different than the case with intermediate caliber rifles, which should be semi-auto only. And full power battle rifles, which have no business having a full auto switch at all, unless they've got a heavy barrel and a good bipod and they're being used as a pseudo light machine gun. Glenn says the Australian Army used the Browning High Power Mark III since the 1970s and has recently decided to replace it. I think this is a testament to the 1930s design, definitely. It's also a testament to the fact that handgun development hasn't really changed much since the 1930s. As someone with experience analyzing military decisions, what do you think is the likelihood the Australians will choose to adopt the new Browning high power you did a video on instead of the SIG P320 they started rolling out in 2025? Or is there a different direction you think they might go in? I'd love to hear your musings. Honestly, I kind of doubt they would go with the new high power. I think the new high power is more of a civilian product. It doesn't have the military pedigree behind it. I mean, as a high power it sort of does, but kind of only to the extent that all Browning tilting barrel guns have that military pedigree. If I were in a military looking for a new handgun, I would be looking for something that is simple and inexpensive and well proven. And the new high power doesn't really fit those criteria. It's an expensive gun. It's not particularly simple. It makes some choices specifically to maintain its high power lineage for people who have a nostalgic desire for a high power but want a more modern pistol that doesn't have some of the flaws of the original high power. I would not expect any organization or agency to choose the P320 now if they're not already deep into it. I wouldn't. To me, Glock is a really pretty obvious choice, and there's a reason. Like, there's a reason that Glock gets something like 50% of all modern service pistol manufacturing done in the world today. It's because they're simple, they're cheap, and they're reliable. Nobody's ever gotten fired for choosing Glock, and not many services have ever regretted choosing a Glock. It may not be the best pistol for any specific task, but it's a darn good compromise for a military force. So, like, that's the easy choice. If you want to do a whole bunch of testing and come up with something that's 5% better for whatever specific characteristics you want, you can do that, but you'll spend a ton of money in the testing process and you'll get something that's a little bit better than Glock. Are there other good options? Yeah, absolutely. HK makes good stuff. Walther makes good stuff. RX makes good, like, I think RX Delta is a woefully underappreciated military service handgun. FN has some good handguns. Like, there's stuff out there, but it ain't the P320 today. To me, that, like, the P320 survived. It won contracts, I think, for being very inexpensive, for being willing to undercut its competitors. I have heard, although I can't confirm it, that Glock had a policy of never being willing to sell a pistol for less than it actually cost them to produce, and SIG was willing to do that, and that is what fundamentally won them the contract with the US military, and probably some of their other contracts as well. Again, I don't know if that's actually true, but it kind of follows. Like, it would surprise me if it wasn't true. And yeah, with the reputational stuff with SIG these days, I can't imagine why anyone would deliberately choose the 320 over other products that do all the same things without having that looming specter over them. So what will the Australian Army eventually choose? I don't know. Often small arms procurement isn't necessarily done by guys who we would look at and go, oh, that's definitely the dude. That guy is 100% gun nerd, knows everything. He's read all the books. Often firearms procurement is done by people who have, you know, a reasonable practical experience, but nothing more. And so they can make some decisions that might surprise people who dedicate their entire lives to nerdy pursuit of firearms minutia. But yeah, I don't know what they'll end up choosing, but to me, it's really hard to go wrong with Glock. Like, there are other good options, but until you find one that's better quality for the same or less price, why wouldn't you just go with Glock? Next question is from Johnny, who says, I live in Belfast, Northern Ireland. I collect militaria. The only handguns, rifles, etc. I can get personally are deactivated ones. The question is it worthwhile keeping these World War II relics in great condition or let the rust take them? For example, I have a K98K with what appears to be a cavalry sling mount. So keep them clean or not. I would, like, to me, I would absolutely clean and cure active rust. If there's red powdery rust forming on a firearm, you should 100% clean that, like, take care of it. Now the question comes of, okay, if the finish is really badly worn, should I get a gun refinished? If the stock's beat up, should I get the stock sanded and finished? And my answer to those questions is generally no. I personally, and I think the American collecting community in general, tends to prefer a gun in its authentic state rather than one that has been reconditioned to look more like new. Now, there's a limit to this. You know, if you have a gun that's at the point where half the parts are missing and the finish is completely gone, well, you're not really losing anything by restoring that thing, by refinishing it and reassembling new parts. And, you know, the stock's been cut down, so you get a new stock for it. Those projects I understand. But if you have a gun that's just got a lot of authentic, natural use wear, I think that's a good condition for a gun to be in, as long as there's no active rust. So you clean it, absolutely, in my mind, but restoring it, I'm generally not a big fan of. All right, we've got 2 more questions and then one quick lightning round. Chiaki says, how would you improve the Estonian M14 TP for the Elbonian military DMR contract? It seems like it's almost perfect already. So I have a video on the Estonian M14 TP. This was, the US gave Estonia a bunch of M14s in the early 90s when Estonia regained its independence. And they used them, among other things, to make a sniper rifle out of, and it's a really bad sniper rifle. Like, the scope's bad, the mounts are bad, the ring's bad, the stock's bad, the bipod's not great. It's pretty terrible. Props to the Estonians for letting me film one, because it's got to be a pretty embarrassing rifle for them. They did, by the way, improve it to the TP2, which is a lot better. But if we were trying to issue the Estonian M14 TP to the Elbonian military, making it as bad as possible, yeah, I'm trying to think of what I would do to it, and not a lot comes to mind. I would say the 2 things I can think of would be more doctrinal than actually with the gun itself. One would be to make sure that the sniper corps have a regimented, routine cleaning program. Because you want to make sure, in order to keep those guns as unuseful as possible, that they're pulling them out of the stocks regularly, like as much as possible. You have to pull it out of the stock to clean it, you know, pull the bolt out, give it a good proper cleaning, which means that you'll never be able to have it properly, repeatedly bedded. Every time you pull it out of the stock, the bedding shifts and your zero kind of gets messed up. So that's one thing with precision M14s, is you don't want to pull them out of the stocks if you don't absolutely have to. So I would try and get the Elbonians to do that as much as possible. And then perhaps also issuing them a variety of different types of ammunition for different purposes. So we can make them a DMR corps, and they're going to get precision ammo for sniper shots, but we should also issue them like exploding observation ammo and incendiary ammo and armor-piercing ammo and tracers maybe, so that they can do things like they can use the tracers to spot targets and indicate targets for other units. They can use armor-piercing stuff on light armored vehicles. But we make sure, of course, and this actually is how it normally works, all of these different cartridges have different ballistic trajectories because the bullet shape and the bullet weights are all a little bit different, and the powder charges might be a bit different. So we can make it as hard as possible for the Elbonian snipers to maintain a good trajectory information. Like, they're going to have to not just re-zero their rifles on almost a weekly basis, but they're then also going to have to remember like 5 different zeros for each of their different rounds. That's about the best I can come up with to really hobble them even more than they would be hobbled just by having Estonian M14 TPs. All right, one more full-on question that comes from Dalbanoski, who says, when you shot the Vickers-Berthier all those years ago, that gun didn't move at all. Well, why do you think that was? Was it the muzzle brake? If so, why hasn't that sort of muzzle brake never been used again? I went back and reviewed the video, and yeah, I remembered it being a nice rifle, but man, that thing really didn't move at all. It was awesome. So why? I think 3 major reasons. The muzzle brake was probably one of them. It's a decent muzzle brake. It's not a magical muzzle brake. I think it's also very important that the Vickers-Berthier doesn't, like, the bolt slows down, decelerates almost completely within the receiver. So you don't have the bolt impacting the back of the receiver at the end of each shot. And it's that impact that tends to move guns around a lot. It's less about the actual recoil energy and more about how that energy is either dissipated within the gun or transferred into the shooter's shoulder. And the Vickers-Berthier did a really good job of decelerating the bolt. Now, that is not the same as being constant recoil. The constant recoil thing, which I should do a proper full video on, is a combination of having the bolt decelerate all the way, but also having the bolt sort of timed with the cyclic rate, the dynamics of the gun. So you can have a bolt that decelerates fully, but still is a gun that can bounce around a bit. Now, the Vickers-Berthier, off a bipod at least, does this really well. And then the third reason is it had a relatively low rate of fire. So there are also other guns that will decelerate the bolt almost or completely within the gun. But if the rate of fire is higher, you've got more energy, like you got more impact on the shooter. When it's slower, it's a little bit easier to maintain the gun on target. So I think it's a combination of all of those. It's a really good internal design combined with a low rate of fire, you know, a duck, 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 sort of 500-600 round rate of fire, combined with a good effective muzzle brake. Put those together and you get a really nice light machine gun. Also, it's 303 British, which is not the most powerful of cartridges. You know, you're starting with a lighter powered gun than if it were in .6 or 8mm Mauser. All right, and our last question is actually 7 different people. I got 7 different questions that were essentially, are you going to do a video about X? And so I figured I'd bunch them all together and address them in sequence here. So Philip is asking about the Opus Venator and the Rideout Arsenal Dragon. These are 2 new high-end pistols that have come out on the market. I'll be honest, I was not familiar with the Opus Venator. I looked it up, looks pretty cool. They are saying it's going to be released in Germany, Austria, Switzerland. If I could get my hands on one in the US, that would be really cool, and I would definitely like to. It's another low bore axis, interesting operating system gun. Definitely check it out if I could. The Rideout Arsenal Dragon, yes, I've talked to the guy. I will be getting a demo gun to do some filming on, but I've been traveling. I'm still traveling, so it's not something I can do till I get home. So that will be coming hopefully sometime next month. But I'm excited to get a look at it. It looks really cool and interesting. Paul has a couple. He asked about the FN Mini-Me. Yes, I will be doing a video on it. What I really want to do, though, is wait to do the Mini-Me until I can do it like at a place like FN, somewhere where I have access to some of the developmental prototypes and a better understanding of the development story. I don't really want to just get a standard M249 or Mini-Me and film it. I would rather be able to give you the development story, or at least a better story of its adoption in a particular military, whether it's one of the European militaries that used it or the US iteration. There's not a lot written on the 249. It's a pretty new gun, so I need to find some good subject matter experts and then get access to the right sample of 249s or Mini-Me's to do that video. Definitely something I plan to do, but I'm not sure exactly when it'll end up happening. Also asked about some AR patterns, the M16A2 and the 416, maybe the original M4 carbine. Yes, all of those are on the plate as well. I do actually have a 416 video that hasn't come out yet, but I did film. It's like the 416A5, I believe. Those will also come. They're not quite as exotic. They're not something I usually focus on. If I go to a collection and they have an M4 like an early M4 carbine, and they have an M16A2, and they have a bunch of weird stuff, I tend to always go with the bunch of weird stuff first, and it means I've never gotten to the more common pieces yet. But they will. They're absolutely good material that I will get to at some point. Douglas asked about a trio of oddball US Cold War machine guns, the 50 cal M85 and then the 30 cal M73 and M219 machine guns. Those were primarily tank machine guns that are kind of weird and have some unique design elements for tanks. Absolutely. Those have actually been on my list for a while, and they are surprisingly hard to find in the US. I haven't run into them overseas much. Most of the services that had them got rid of them a while ago, didn't keep them. Tank and aircraft machine guns are almost always harder to find and work with because they're hard to display. They're not really shootable. They're generally much less collectible in people's eyes. So just haven't gotten across those, but they're definitely on my list to do. Guy asked about the 416F. That one's 100% on my radar. We'll see how it works out, but that'll definitely be happening. Cody asked about the Korobov rifles, as well as the Nambu Type 1 and Type 2 submachine guns. I have not yet come across any of those. The Japanese submachine guns are around, but very scarce. Eventually, I will come across them and film them. The Russian prototypes are going to be a much trickier proposition at this point. I don't anticipate being able to go to Russia for the foreseeable future, and that's where virtually all of those guns are, so probably not going to happen. If I ever came across one, I would absolutely jump at the opportunity to film it. And then lastly, Hazel asked about the Ravelli Beretta, aka often called the Beretta 1918. That one, I can actually tell you, I not only will film, I have filmed it. I just filmed that on this trip just a week or two, about 2 weeks ago. So that video will be coming. I have a bunch of stuff already queued up, so I don't know exactly when, but within the next couple of months, we will have that, which will be the last in my trifecta of early Italian submachine guns. That one, the OVP 1918 and the 1915 Villa Prosa. So I was excited to find the Beretta submachine gun version to be able to round that out. So, that was a whole bunch of questions. Thank you to all of the patrons who made the Q&A possible and who submitted questions. Sorry if I didn't get yours. We had over 100 questions this time. And we get this deep into a Q&A and my voice is kind of going, so we got to call an end to it. Oh, thank you as well to Kiro for being an awesome company and being willing to help sponsor the channel, give you guys a discount. So like I said at the beginning, if you want to give a delicious Finnish whiskey a try, the Sauna Stories #2 here is a limited release. It's currently available in Europe. Unfortunately not available in the US, but the standard Kiro rye that they base this same mash bill on is available in the US, is pretty inexpensive and a fantastic option if you haven't tried it. Give it a shot. If you go to their online store, you can use the code ForgottenWeapons10 and get 10% off, and also gets me a 10% commission on your order to help support Forgotten Weapons. So thank you guys all very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.